Hi, welcome with Even Music. That's quite cool. I'm Jay Corliss. I'm a Senior Advisor for Entrepreneurship and Innovation with the UN Foundation. And essentially what I do is I look at how social entrepreneurs go from idea all the way to large-scale uptake. And it's a pretty exciting job. I work with lots of folks like you, and I help you understand what you need to do and what you're going to face in your journey to increasing impact and benefiting lots of lives. That's me. So what we're going to do here today is we're talking about the ecosystem. What does this ecosystem look like, and what will your journey look like? But before I describe the ecosystem, can I just get a raise of hands? How many of you are social entrepreneurs or project managers? Good. How about, do we have NGOs and institutions here? Good, good. Do we have impact investors, funders, corporates? All right, we've got a great mix. So each of you play a role in the ecosystem I'm going to describe. So essentially what we have to do, this is a thought exercise. The ecosystem starts very wide, it gets narrow in the middle, and widens again. So if you think of an hourglass, what happens, ideas are those little pieces of sand at the very bottom. And when you have an idea, you start to create and cluster. And you are fighting to get all the way up from that bottom funnel to step one. The step one is where that thin part hits right at the bottom. That's a lot of work. That is a lot of work. And when you're that little piece of sand and you're trying to become a pearl, you're looking for friends. You're looking for friends, and it's passion. And it's like, hey, I believe in this idea, and I'm really fighting. I'm fighting hard. Come join me. And you can convince other people. And you'll convince your close friends. I've followed the path of Josephine, and she's done this very well. She convinces close friends, and they get together, and then they build. TECHFUGEES was also something like this. TECHFUGEES just exploded, right? It went from a small idea to a network pretty quickly because it was a compelling idea. But then you hit your first barrier, and that first barrier comes after you have a proof of concept, you have a product, but you need more. You might need a business plan, you might need funding, you need a variety of things to get into that pathway of scale. That's when your organization is going to change and you're going to start to grow. You're going to have to build a team. In the tech industry, that's whenever you see founders come in and understand a different role they're going to play. And then that pathway takes some time because that's when collaboration, partnerships, and teamwork becomes very, very important, right? So as an entrepreneur, you need to be aware of that. That's step two of your pathway. You're going to start looking for impact investors, institutions, NGOs. Most of you are in that middle area of the pathway. Some of you are at the very beginning. Accelerators, boot camps, all of you, that's in the beginning. But once you get through that pathway to scale and it starts to open up, that's daylight. That's large-scale impact. That's where you're really starting to impact hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people, depending on the level that you're looking at, right? So that is essentially what an ecosystem looks like. Now our conversation is going to go through and we're going to try to understand how to position yourself and how each of these organizations position themselves. So we'll do 5 minutes from each of them. They're going to organize and discuss and kind of present their work to you for 5 minutes. Then we're going to have a conversation because I'm really interested in the work they're doing. I'm going to ask them some questions and hopefully that'll help you understand where their position is within the ecosystem. And then the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, we're going to open it up to you so you can ask us some questions. So on our panel, Mike introduced the panel, but we're going to start off with Ben because Ben has something pretty interesting to say. So we're going to give Ben 5 minutes to start off and kick off the discussions.
Is this on? Hi, everybody. I work at Better Place Lab. We're a non-profit think tank based in Berlin, and we do research about civic tech. And so for the past couple of years, we've been following the development of this thing called Refugee Tech, with a particular focus on the civic tech projects. What I want to present just in this beginning part is based on a research project that I did with a couple of colleagues, Lavinia Shvedesky and Akram Alfa-Wakheri. We did an overview and an analysis of the civic tech projects in this space of integration within Germany. If you're thinking that it's a bit limited just to be looking at what's happening in Germany, there is a graphic that I'd like to show you. Here are all of the civic tech projects that we're aware of in this space of refugee integration. And okay, I mean, inevitably there's some bias in there because we're based in Berlin and so we're going to hear about these projects more. But I think that's only a small explanation of what's happening here. I think it's fairly clear that there's an extremely strong clustering effect happening in Germany, in Berlin in particular. So we know of 112 projects, around half of those in Berlin. And that there's no comparable clustering effect anywhere. But what I want to present to you now, I think, is internationally applicable. As part of our research, we interviewed 48 projects, and over the course of these conversations, we started to notice certain patterns coming up again and again. And we developed this typology of 6 different species of civic tech projects working in the space based on where they come from, who they are, and the way in which they work. And I think this tells us something about what the project is like and how likely it is to succeed. The first category we call the newbies. We saw a lot of projects founded by students, either immediately after graduation or in some cases while they were still students, as part of their courses. There was a project called AFIFA in Dresden that was set up by a group of students with the help of their professor as part of a design course, as part of their studies. AFIFA is a map of Dresden showing the different services available to refugees in this. So with the newbies, I think it's exciting to see this new generation engaging and bringing something new. But if you look at the results of what's come out of it, mostly we can say that the newbies have struggled to understand and integrate with the existing systems to build partnerships. And they've struggled in most cases to get any kind of funding. The second group is the social entrepreneurs. These are typically a little bit older. These are people often in their late 20s or 30s with some professional experience. They've got richer networks than the newbies. One example is Go Volunteer. This is set up by a guy in Berlin, worked for McKinsey for many years, then 2015 happened, and he left his job in order to set up this platform for people to volunteer on. Now, the social entrepreneurs think and act and talk a lot like tech startups. They hang out in hipster co-working spaces in Berlin. And they are, more than the other types, focused on building partnerships and acquiring funding from a range of different sources. And social entrepreneurs have run a handful of really successful crowdfunding campaigns. So the successful crowdfunding campaigns that we've seen have come from this type of project. The hackers. So this is a subculture with a long history going way back before the current attention on refugee issues. And so these are people with a tech background, coders, who also have an ideological streak and like to spend their spare times at community meetups and hackathons. And starting in 2015, we started to see these existing networks activating and projects coming along to support refugee integration. One project, again based in Berlin, is called MetaCollect. This is an open data project to try and get an overview of civil society activity in this area. What we've seen with the hackers is they've struggled to really get their projects going. If you have a group of people working in their free time without a fixed organization, without a way of making decisions quickly, they've got stuck in very long, slow discussion processes and haven't really got the project moving in a lot of cases. And so in this hacker community, I feel there's a strong sense of disappointment and disillusionment and a sense of feeling kind of underappreciated in what they tried to do. The professionals are slightly different. These are people sort of mid to high level professionals, a lot of them in IT, but not only IT. TECHFUGEE's own Mike Butcher I'd put into this category. So these are people who wanted to use their position and their expertise to make an impact in this area. And so they had an idea. But in most cases, they didn't want to leave the job they were doing. They wanted to sort of give the impulse and help, and then take more of a backseat role and hand over the day-to-day running to other people. The professionals often built technically high-quality products. One example is Lala. This is another volunteering platform set up by a guy in Munich who had been successful with his own tech companies and invested quite a lot of his own money in creating this platform, really professional level, full stack development. Nearly there, number 5. The activists are typically much more ideologically, politically motivated. Examples include the Freifunk network, so people providing free Wi-Fi and refugee accommodation, also Flüchtlinge Willkommen. Some of you will know about getting refugees into flat shares with locals. Because of their strong ideological stance and motivation, the activists have been cautious in a lot of cases about creating partnerships and who they're going to work with. They're often suspicious of governments and of corporations, and so that's sort of impeded their ability to scale up what they're doing. And the final category is newcomer-led or refugee-led innovation. This is now, happily, we're starting to see more and more of this, and also more and more initiatives to create an enabling environment for this to happen. So Place, I know, is doing excellent work based in Paris to create enabling environments. One example of a project is Eid Be Eid. This is an Arabic language information platform for newcomers in Germany. Very quickly, just to finish up. So this phenomenon of refugee tech is sort of 2 years old now. We saw a big explosion to begin with. And the question that we're all here to ask is, okay, 2 years on, where are we, and what's going to happen next? And I'll just offer one thought before we go into the discussion, is based on the 6 types that I presented, and also what Jay said to begin with. In that initial moment, in late 2015, we saw this huge wave of engagement and explosion in innovative ideas from very diverse groups, these 6 different groups. But not all projects were created equal. And what we're now seeing, as we get to the narrow point and a period of consolidation and professionalization, is some projects, and I think in particular the social entrepreneurs, are better positioned to do that than some of the others. Thank you.
Great. Ben? Thank you. Yeah, that's a great introduction to the players within the ecosystem, right? So whenever I was describing those bits of sand that were, wanted to become pearls, he goes all the way from newbies to the social entrepreneurs, hackers, professionals. So it's a great introduction to the different players that we're looking at. And I think the way he resumed it, that I wouldn't necessarily endorse that it's only the social entrepreneurs. Everybody has a place to play in it. But what's interesting about social entrepreneurs is they're working with new methodologies and new tools that potentially activists or NGOs didn't have whenever I started my career. So I've been really interested in the social entrepreneur space. We're going to go back and ask Ben some questions, but now Ben's given us the players. We're going to talk about 2 platforms with Ionia and TECHFUGEES. These are 2 very different platforms that aggregate and pull together all of these players, right? So they're honest brokers. They want to pull together resources and help those movers and shakers take steps forward. I would say TECHFUGEES is at a national, international and national level, and Iona's more local level, so we'll start with Iona. If you give us maybe 5-7 minutes of presentation of the work you're doing, and then we'll follow in with Josephine.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. I'm okay. All right. It's great to be in this space because this is definitely a visualization of what an ecosystem looks like when everyone comes together. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we do. For us, there are 2 numbers that are important at this point and where everything starts. 65+ million people displaced right now, an estimate of 250 million people by 2050. That means 2 things. That there are people in need of innovative, dignified, humane solutions right now, but that everything that we're building today at this tipping point with this energy also means that we're on a journey towards a more innovative version of humanitarian aid. The work that we've been doing is that out of the chaos of, as you mentioned, 2015, we started seeing the emergence of an actor that so far is usually in the fine prints, and that's what we call the Grassroot Innovators. So it's been a highlight, it's been a hopeful highlight actually. What we've seen emerge is a network of different organizations, especially in Greece, dealing not just with integration, but also with emergency response. Anything from search and rescue, arrival on the shores, camp management, distribution, all of that, that put dignity and empathy at the very core of what they're doing. And for us, it's been impressive. It's been beautiful. There are fantastic examples. We've actually worked with TECHFUGEES this time around to bring 3 members of our network. We have a network of over 60 organizations in the field in Greece. And they're presenting and they're pitching. And they're beautiful examples. We've seen the creation of community spaces that are bringing a lot of people together in the same space. We're seeing the creation of more dignified areas in camp environments where refugees are invited to reinvent the spaces themselves. And when we share a lot of these images, I get comments like, well, this doesn't really look like a refugee camp. This doesn't really look like a moment of crisis. And I'm saying, well, that's exactly the point. The point is that in the 21st century, with the resources that we have, with the know-how, the technology that is available, we should be seeing humanitarian aid that goes beyond. So this is the starting point for everything that we do. So working on the ground with the crisis, but also building up towards something that is bigger. And what we mean by ecosystem support, it means that you're working in real time. You're there on the field and you're trying to provide the resources. First of all, increasing collaboration between these organizations, but then also going past that narrow point in the ecosystem journey, which is about opening those doors to have access to partners, to start working with more institutionalized organizations, with companies, with UN agencies, and INGOs, because everyone can benefit from that ecosystem. In the same way that it would be hugely beneficial for grassroots organizations to start professionalizing. And the spectrum of grassroots goes from a very informal sort of volunteer initiative all the way up to registered small NGOs with a small budget, maybe a couple of people have a salary. They do face a lot of the challenges that keep them from progressing past that narrow point. One is capacity building, and we're currently working on a project which is about bringing pro bono experts on the ground, putting them in these organizations to help them structure their processes. The second part is access to those partners who so far, rightly because the capacity was missing, were reluctant to work with grassroots organizations and more informal civil society initiatives. So we're trying to open those doors and show these examples of dignified solutions, but also of dignified solutions that have the capacity to be good partners. Because it is empathy and dignity is a starting point, but in order to progress, you do need that ability to be organized. And in the same way that we're advocating for grassroots to be included in the conversation, we're also advocating for grassroots to work on themselves and keep improving their operations and their ability to support, because when they are operating better, they do more and have a bigger impact. So this is the work that we've been doing in Greece for about a year and a half now. As I said, we have a network of 60 such partners. We're progressively working with larger organizations, and we're seeing the change. We're seeing the potential in these examples being able to become practices at a high level. We're seeing that potential for these organizations to be part of innovating humanitarian aid. But we're also seeing a very long way to getting to that smarter version, better version of aid that includes everyone in the discussion. And we're definitely working towards that. So it's an everyday mission to work on these two levels of how can we be answering pressing needs, and right now there are definitely a lot of pressing needs in Greece. We're seeing an uptake in arrivals. We're seeing some very difficult camp conditions, 70% overcapacity in island camps, a transition from larger NGOs to the government taking over. So these are difficult moments. And what we're trying to say is that this is also an opportunity for that collaboration. There are a lot of organizations still on the ground that can step in and help out and play a role. And we're just waiting to see, which doors need to be opened, and we're trying to be that key that opens them. So hopefully we can go past that stage of, this is a beautiful example, this is a cute story, this is an interesting project, and then becoming more valid partners increasingly, and also more and more the norm of humanitarian aid.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jana. So I think that's a very good introduction to the phase 2 of where that hourglass starts to narrow and the issues that organizations start to confront, right? So there were 2 key words there that there was a lot that she said, but I think there's 2 issues there that we want to start thinking about. It's really about collaboration and access, right? So as you're in that path, going towards large-scale uptake and really impact and increasing your impact, you need access. You need access to new partners, new funders, new institutions. You need to find a way to access these people. Resources, impact investors, you need to find a way to access these people. So that's where hubs and these platforms come into play. I think I'll turn it over now to Josephine to talk a little bit about collaboration and TECHFUGEES, what TECHFUGEES is doing to also play at this kind of platform level and bring the ecosystem together.
Thank you. And I also think that there was one big word, which was capability building. It was a big one. Because I know TECHFUGEES, as you know, is a network. We are in 25 countries through volunteers. We create hackathons. So the core of TECHFUGEES is coordination and connection. And I like the fact that you use we're professionals and we're using, this is true, we're using our privileged positions for the cause. So all of us in the teams, I mean, I'm the only one really working full-time. Most of us in the team are full-time with a job, but using the connections and their expertise for TECHFUGEES. So it's using our positions of privilege to open up the discussion about tech for refugees, opening our networks for refugees so they can be employed or getting into boot camps and getting integrated. I know that we have more than 70 refugees around here today at the conference, and we have more that signed up on the waiting list. And for me, it's already doing a bit. It's like they are able to access to a high network of people that have positions in society. They can further them, they can introduce them to companies and interviews. So the connection element is core at TECHFUGEES. The capability building is something that we want to get into, but we've not been able to address, and this is great that you're doing it more than us. But the capability building is essential. If we don't, and I think you pointed at this, if we don't want to see this people creating stuff and then all going down and not leading anywhere, we need to address that problem and put it at the core. We need to invest in capability building. We need to invest in the knowledge of what has been built in the last 2 years and take it for the next generation or take it in the future. I don't think TECHFUGEES is a revolutionary idea. I'm pretty sure lots of people had this idea. But we were the one to be able to, because of our position of privilege, to take it to the stage where we are here today. And even if TECHFUGEES was to disappear in 10 years from now, I hope that the lesson learned will be infused in all of the people that have been part of this community. Capability building is key. And I think you just put out the number, Yona, is we're going to have more refugees, or we're going to have to adapt to a world that is more migrant, more mobile. And so anything that is being built in that community today is relevant also for migrants, is relevant for homeless people, is relevant for people that are vulnerable. So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, thank you. So Josephine and all of you are obviously very aware of TECHFUGEES, so I'm happy that she kind of talk a little bit more about the issues of capacity building, capability building, because that is something that we're looking at, and this panel, in a sense, is a first stab in that, is to share our knowledge on what happens within an ecosystem, so that as you chart your path, or as if you're looking to support, you understand where to pinpoint your support, or you understand what your roadmap might look like. Our next speaker is maybe at the middle to top end of the thin part of the hourglass, and it's Céline from the United Nations Haut Commissaire de... Oh, HCR, okay. Yeah, UNHCR, exactly, it is in French, okay. So this was a huge innovation about 70 years ago. And it was an organization created to host. I'm from the UN. I've worked with the United Nations for a long time. And this was the first organization really to look at these issues and create the ecosystem. The ecosystems exist. These issues exist. It's on front page news because of organizations like HCR. Celine's not going to talk to us about HCR, but she's going to talk to us a little bit more of how those organizations are adapting to these new ecosystems, right? Yes. Take it over, Celine.
I'm very happy to be here today and to represent what you call the institutions right at the end of the process. Just to present myself very quickly, I'm working for UNHCR for 10 years now. I'm based in Paris, which is my country, so I'm very happy to have been based in my country, but I've been for more than 8 years in the field, mainly in the Great Lakes region, Central African Republic, DRC, Burundi. What we're seeing today is an increasing number of people displaced in the world, more challenges and less resources. Resources are getting scarce, and we have to do more, and we have to do better with less resources. And how to do that is to work together. And this is a goal of the UN in general, and this is also something that was reaffirmed last year during the General Assembly of the UN. You may have heard of the New York Declaration, and we're working on a global compact for refugees by 2018, which will be a global plan involving different actors from different sectors, from the citizens, but also local authorities, of course governments, national authorities, but also the private sector, to work together towards achieving the results we have to achieve to help displaced people have a better future and in an inclusive way. So maybe what I can do today, maybe I'm going to present you two projects that have worked and that are examples of projects where the UN is working with different types of actors to do something meaningful together. And the first one is to address a huge challenge today when we talk about displaced people. It's to be able to communicate with them in their language. It's to be able to have interpreters to work with them. And we worked on a project in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, which is called Translation Cards. And it was a project together with Google, Mercy Corps, and other actors to find a way and to be able to communicate immediately with the people arriving in their language. And the project was, in fact, to create an app which helps writing down the text you want to say, and translating it in the language of the person who needs to understand and to have access to information. And what we've realized is that refugees told us, oh, it's the first time now we feel connected to the humanitarian actors here because we're understanding, what you're telling us. So that was an example of a project that would not have been possible if we had not worked together with different actors who have different expertise. We have the expertise in terms of protection of refugees, but we have to work with other actors and use technology to be able to achieve the results and better protect people. So that's one example. Another example, and now I'm coming to France, and I'm coming to a project I'm working on. So in UNHCR, I'm also part of the UNHCR fellowship, so I'm one of the innovation fellows. And the challenge was to see how, again, to work better together in France to achieve results. And what we've seen at UNHCR in Paris since 2015 is that many people are willing to help, and every day in the office I was receiving calls of people asking me, how can I help? What can I do? How can I support your work? And among the people who called us, there are two people who are experts in food who called us and said they want to do something to change the perception people have of refugees in France, but also to better integrate them And they had an idea, which was to ask restaurants to open their kitchen to refugee chefs. And they told me, you are the experts in refugee protection. We have an expertise in food. If we do something together, it would be better. And this is how a project that is called the Refugee Food Festival started. So it started with a very small initiative by 2 citizens calling us, having an idea of something they wanted to do. And now 2 years later, the Refugee Food Festival in June 2017 took place in 13 cities in 5 European countries. More than 80 restaurants opened their kitchen to refugee chefs. More than 10,000 people came to eat in the restaurants and asked questions. They were more aware of the question, but also the refugee chefs were able to access employment. So that's one of the projects we're working here in France. And I see time is running, so maybe I will stop here. And I'm very happy to reply to other questions you may have.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you, Celine. I think the last example is really how effective and efficient a large institution like HCR can help something scale, right? So many of you have that dream of, wow, if only I could get in touch with the UN, boom, I would explode. How can I work for the UN? How can I do this? Sometimes it's as quickly as that. I've worked for 20 years. I was a tech developer within the UN. Sometimes it's as quickly as that, meeting the right person at the right time, and suddenly you're in a 5-country project. Many of us don't have that luck, right? It's a long sweat equity path, right? So now let's go into some quick questions. I'd like, I think, Ben, you mentioned it at the beginning. You called it clustering. Celine, you talked about bringing actors together. But at what level do you engage, and what are your feelings about working together? How important is collaboration? How important is clustering? Can you make a difference between clustering, collaboration, and partnering? Will each of you just give us a minute or two of thoughts? I'll start with you, Ben.
I think that the clustering effect that I've seen in Germany and Berlin, especially at the beginning, gave a real sense of energy and community, and that helped people stay motivated. I think people who aren't surrounded by a community of people who share the same vision and same value and that kind of encouragement might struggle to stay the course, especially, as I said, many of these projects took longer than they hoped to really build what they were trying to build, took longer than they hoped to get any kind of funding, so working on a voluntary basis just on the power of this idea or vision that they'd had. And I think that the communities learned a bit about what kind of interactions are important. In the early days, it was anyone who's interested in anything a bit like this, get in a room and we'll talk and see what happens. And gradually people have become a bit more strategic about, okay, where's my project? Who do I need to be talking with? And how do I seek that out? A friend of mine, Annika Richard, who runs Ready School in Berlin, it's a coding academy for Berlin, for refugees and newcomers. She, at a certain point, stopped going to most community events because she said, talking to other apps, talking to other startups, I mean, that's great, we can share ideas, but I need to be talking to people who aren't like me. I need to be going out and building partnerships with established organizations or with the private sector. So I think there's been a more subtle understanding of, let's not only talk to one another, but let's talk to people who aren't like us, who haven't heard of us.
Thank you. I think that's very important. There's that again, that idea of working together and motivation, right? And why are you going to continue going to these meetings if they're not adding value to the work you're doing? Iona, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that clustering, collaboration, and partnering are almost like a sequence. Clustering is something that happens almost naturally. And for us, even within the grassroots, there is clustering. Like the more social innovation, social entrepreneur type of people are not necessarily getting completely along with the more politicized side of the spectrum. But it's happening. I think our work within the grassroots community has been around collaboration, which is about basically open source. So how do we create mechanisms? Because for us, innovation is not necessarily always about technology. How do you create sometimes physical platforms where people are going to come together in the same room within a community and do that community building? And that's where collaboration comes out from. And we've seen it in the space of a few months. We started with a regular monthly community meeting. We progressed that into a grassroots coordination system. And people are now, they're a village, they're talking to each other. Partnering is going back to this idea that that Josephine raised, which is about privilege, which is about stepping out of that space in which you are. And for us, Campfire has that privilege in the sense that we are in the grassroots meetings one day, sitting in a community center, surrounded by people that work every day directly with refugees as volunteers. We're in the UNHCR meetings, but we're also on in the ability to reach out to TECHFUGEES and be like, look, are you interested in the teams that we're working with? It becomes more about access and about being more strategic and thinking, which is the first type of organization that is going to be interested in this? Which are the needs of the grassroots community? Which are the, always trying to scratch two itches at the same time. And so I think all three things happen, but they happen at different times, and you have to, if you're building an ecosystem and you're helping out in real time, you have to progress from clustering to collaboration to partnerships.
Great. So again, think of that hourglass and those steps that she just described. Some of you have experienced that. Some of you can speak to that. I think if it's okay, can we open it up to questions from the audience now? So do we have any questions?
Do your worst.
Raise your hand. We might get a microphone to you, or just scream at us.
Just a very technical one. At the very beginning was, I think it's 65.5 million displaced people today, and then the number was put out that it was going to 250 million in 2050, and I wondered if that based on a study, is that based on something that's successful, or is it just, I don't happen to know what that's coming from, but I'd like very much to know what that's based on.
So this is
because that's an enormous number.
Yeah, so that's an estimate. It's not a study that Campfire has conducted. These are studies that are done by much larger organizations. It's not a certainty that this will be the exact number, but it is a number that is based not just on conflict, but on redefining refugees and displaced people along the lines of climate refugees as well. And so it is, at this point, I really can't remember. I think it was mentioned in the Guardian article as well. So it wasn't the original source, but it was where we picked it up. Yeah, but it might not be that exact number, but the scale of the rise is expected to be like that.
We had a second question here in the middle somewhere. Is it?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to ask a bit more, it's a bit of a broader question. I think that when we look at the situation with refugees and migrants in Europe today compared to 2015, it's a very different landscape. And today, we're not seeing so many arrivals, but rather we're looking at how to integrate refugees into Europe, but also we're seeing a very different policy landscape. So politically, things are changing dramatically at the European level, and not for the better. And so I'm wondering if the panelists, or in general, if we have any ideas about how technology can be used perhaps to lobby governments or to put pressure on governments and to be able to make political change as well, rather than just grassroots action. I mean, I'm not saying that grassroots action is not important, but rather can technology work in both areas at the same time?
The thing with governments, I mean, I can talk for France, I guess, for now. They don't really understand technology. I think if the discussion is not happening, is they see technology as a surveillance or security thing, but not as a way to better serve your citizens. And recently, the Prime Minister in France has decided to reform that and to use technology to better provide services to its own citizen. Great. But if you really listen to the speech, it's really about how do I use technology to optimize my cost, that kind of way. So I think governments don't really understand the potential of technology, or you don't have technologists within their teams to really understand what it means. we are the generation that kind of is born with the internet and technology, and I hope that more of us are going to get into governments to really have them see things differently, because our behaviors have changed, because the way we live our lives are changed because of those phones. We use them every day. Like when 20 years ago you would call someone from your house and say, we're going to meet at that time, at that place, and I'm going to look like this, you would be on time. And today, you don't even know if you're going to meet the people that said an hour ago that they would meet you. So, I mean, and you know, you work from home, you haven't shaved, you haven't, I mean, we live lives that are completely different. And there needs to be a change. So, I don't really know what to say to your question. Yes, things are changing, but not so much from the government level. They really have a lens of, I don't think they understand tech. I don't want to put mean intentions on the government to say they don't want to help migrants and they don't want to help this ecosystem of refugee tech. I think they're intimidated to technology because they don't know about it and they have a very narrow idea of it.
I'll jump in here. We're different generations, and I'm part of the first generation that started introducing tech into governments. And I do have to echo Josephine's call to action: is get into government. That's something that we do need a new generation and tech-savvy generation to get into government. I'd like to hand it over to Celine if I can, because she had some thoughts on that question as well.
I just wanted to make a quick comment on that, and maybe it's not totally linked to tech, but tech is used to find solutions, and a way to convince different actors, and including the government, is to show projects that work and to show the results of those projects. And technology may be the tool used to reach the results. But what we have seen is that when we're able to show results of projects, including new projects, then there is a buy-in. So like, yes, using technology to achieve something and then show the results and say, yes, we've achieved that using technology.
Yeah, that's definitely linked to the idea of scale. Is that if you can demonstrate in your first iteration, second iterations, proof of concept, once those results start to move, they move forward. One last on that question, I think what we really need is policy accelerators, right? The government needs to understand how to accelerate and innovate along with you. So bring the results, take it to government, and help them achieve and build the policy that they need. We had a question here in the middle.
So I had a question about just culture, generally speaking, and building culture with regard to, for example, NGOs that work at a grassroots level on the ground directly with refugees. My observation is that there's something of a gap between that world and the world that we're living in right now, which is mainly tech-driven and very much innovation-driven. And culturally speaking, I wonder how, if you guys have come across that problem in terms of implementation and execution, and how exactly you think we can build bridges between those two communities moving forward.
Iona?
Is that okay? I'll start it off, but I think it's something that then opens up to the rest of us. Yes, I mean, grassroots tend to have a very sensitive radar to when you're, selling buzzwords. And I started off from a startup background, and it was a rude awakening when I went in and I started talking about innovation and all that kind of stuff, because I meant something that was efficient and something that was dignified, but I had to actually make it clear and not come in as like someone who's completely clueless. So there was a period of adapting, and also I started off as a volunteer, so I also got the reality of the situation, and so it was about bridging those two worlds. I think it is almost a language. I think TECHFUGEES says we translate, and there is an element of translation in bridging that separation of the energy that comes from a tech world and a startup environment, of the of the structure that comes from some of the INGOs and all that, of the meticulous differentiations that research puts into things. And there's value in all of it. And there's also value in sort of sometimes the harsh realism of grassroots coming up to you and going, look, I don't care if you call it smarter aid or innovative aid or dignified aid or whatever it is that you call it. What I know is that we need to develop a way to get things that are sitting in warehouses into camps. And can we develop this? And technology has a role to play. But I think all of us, and I include myself into this because I consider myself as a bridge, but also sometimes as a visitor a little bit to the grassroots. I have a field team that works with them every day. I'm more on the partnerships side of things. We need to go in with humility because there's hundreds of people working every day, and sometimes it's aid workers from organizations, and sometimes it's volunteers from grassroots and informal structures, and it's refugees themselves, and they want real solutions. So we can go in with a lot of ideas, but ultimately it's about listening and saying, okay, so what do you need? And maybe I have it, or maybe I can go and get it, but what do you need? And they'll give you the answer, and it's usually a very simple one. With regards to technology, when we did Ben interviewed me about a year and a half ago, and for research and technology, and it was like, what is technology doing? And I'm like, well, the real technology that's being used here is WhatsApp and Facebook. Those have been the game changers. They're the roadmaps to then building high-tech solutions and innovative solutions and finding ways to integrate other partners. But we have to treat those roadmaps with humility and respect because the reality is always what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's, it kind of stands out definitely. The idea of humility and listening. We're all people that care, right? And we are all people that have ideas, and particularly in this space, we're entrepreneurs. But we also have to remind ourselves that listening is important. If we can have, we were actually granted 2 more minutes, so 1 more question. Yeah, go ahead. If you just want to stand up and holler, you've been patient.
There's a saying that goes, nothing about us without us. So I was thinking about, in terms of ecosystem of refugee tech, what are the ethics of including refugees in the process? Are there advisory councils and initiatives, things like that? And on the other side, your thoughts on the role of empathy. Empathy is very important in terms of growing the ecosystem. And what's the role of technology? We tend to think of technology as computers and social media. What about the human motivational aspect in order to have the population be able to pressure government so that they keep refugees as a priority? So what's the role that technology can do in connection to empathy? Thank you.
Celine.
I will be very quick. I just want to make a comment to reply to that question, which is linked to the previous question as well. I think, and this is how UNHCR works in the field, the problems are identified together with refugees. And solutions have to be found together as well. And that's key to the success of a project. And then technology can help to achieve the result. But just to give you a very concrete example of something we're doing in Lebanon, where we've started a Humanitarian Innovation Lab. We are working together with refugees using social media, doing social media monitoring to identify the protection problems and the problems of refugees to be able then to find solutions. And this is done directly with refugee leaders. So I know the time is over, but I just wanted to make a quick comment like that the problems are identified together, and of course, it has to be inclusive.
Yeah.
Can I make just one comment? Totally agree. Half of our participants of our hackathons are refugees. My team is made of refugees for some part, but I'll go one step further. It's not like you're a refugee, you're not a refugee. We don't give refugee badges to people that are refugees. We're all in it together, that's it. And I think TECHFUGEES comes from that end. It's like if we don't fix that problem, which is our problem, then we're in the problem. I mean, the solution is within us. It's not about refugee, non-refugee, that's it.
That's it. We're all in it together. Thank you very much.